Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new thing, maybe a one-off, I'm not sure. I've been kind of toying with the idea of doing something like this for a while, and, kind of wasn't sure how to go about it, in what way, and stuff. But I heard once that sometimes you can't think yourself into action, you got to act yourself into thinking. And so I figured I should, just do this and let the results maybe guide the rest of my action. And with that being said, welcome. I'm Neontaster, and also extreme online tweeter Neontaster. And this is going to be something more political, I guess. I mean, maybe that word isn't exactly appropriate because I don't know if I'm going to be talking about, elections and a policy, although I feel like that's probably going to be unavoidable a little. But I'm talking more about, social, the goings on in public discourse, public online discourse, what I do, except through my mouth instead of through my fingers. And, the truncated format of Twitter and the bad-natured discourse about both the things that go on Twitter itself and articles that are then shared on social media, discussed on social media, are exploited for bad faith. And sometimes you can lose control of your own, of statements or words of your own. And they're kind of appropriated from you, stolen from you, turned into something else. And then that characterization then exists in the public sphere more presently than your intention, often easily proven by somebody just going to read what you wrote instead of reading about what you wrote. So without further ado, let's talk about the Harper's letter, the thing that everybody is talking about, yelling about, because there's a lot to talk about with regards to this. It brought up a lot of different things, a lot of personal grievances, a lot of specific issues within what you would call the culture war. In a way that the letter itself probably wouldn't indicate. This is going to be said to death everywhere, but the letter itself is rather tame. I would call it somewhat emphatic, but it's certainly not antagonistic. I think it goes out of its way to specifically only allude to things that have happened without mentioning them in great detail, in order to not turn it into a litigation of those specific incidents, and also to not say these incidents are the problem. It's more the atmosphere in which incidents like this can and do happen that is the problem. But again, rather harmless also. The letter itself is very liberal. I mean, if I could just sum it up for you very, very basically. It says the right wing is very dangerous and chilling to speech, Trump specifically. But we can't let our opposition to him and to that turn into that. Because, we want to be better than that, and it's also objectively bad. And B, because it's being exploited by right-wing demagogues. Again, it named Trump, and it specifically said right-wing demagogues. But then when it spent a few sentences giving recent examples of cancel culture, they only alluded to them in a way that, if you're following this kind of thing closely, you would say, okay, I know what that is, and I know what that is. But not everyone will, and certainly not looking back, far removed from this time period. If somebody reads this letter 5 years down the road, I don't know if they know who they're talking about when they say, an editor was fired for running a controversial op-ed. Although I have a feeling that 5 years down the line, that might apply to far more stories than it does now. Although a thing that the letter mentions is that actually it will have the reverse effect, meaning that cases of cancel culture won't increase. What will increase is the hesitance to do things that could get you fired or otherwise, like publicly tarred and feathered. Which is why, they say it's a chilling effect on speech. You're just going to have an unwillingness to step out there, a lack of safety net, a lack of a feeling of stability as an editor or as a writer, that in some way you're shielded, specifically so you can say things that are controversial, say things that will upset power. And I think that power is an extremely central word to this whole story. Who is the powerful, right? Because speaking truth to power and saying controversial things about the powerful and canceling the powerful for the bad things that they do or the perceived bad things that they do is still virtuous in the eyes of people who hate this letter. It's just that they have not come to terms with the fact that they also represent power, because there is no power and lack of power. There are powers, in the same way that, pre the world wars and the emergence of two superpowers, there were multiple large powers in the world. In the time that led up to World War I, for instance, there were a lot of powers that were considered like large major world powers in the way that for many years the United States and the Soviet Union were pretty much the only players in that league. And so our culture and our politics and our legal system and academia, they all have a power and they all have powers within them. It's not, speaking truth to power is not a general, widespread, broadside, although sometimes it is. But the idea is, you're going after someone who holds a certain kind of power. And I do think that people, to the left of the type of liberals who signed this letter, are still living in the sense that they do not wield any power, which, I mean, I don't know if it's something that they truly feel like, or if it's, a way to deflect against criticism of them as powerful. But if you get Noam Chomsky to sign a letter that says that, left-wing activism is going too far, I think that instead of saying that he's an old man that's losing his mental faculties, which is something that I saw people say, to think that perhaps a motive of someone like that would be, hey, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and this corruption that I'm sensing could be a direct result of the accumulation of power among the disenfranchised. It's almost like there's a disenfranchised lobby now. In the same way that labor unions, back when labor unions, were extremely, they're still extremely powerful. But again, if you watch The Irishman and you see how much power someone like Jimmy Hoffa had in his prime, represented a group that, individually or in small clumps had absolutely no power. 5 Teamsters have no power, but a national union of Teamsters has incredible power. And in that same sense, you can say, some trans people or, other underprivileged communities, are powerless in our society in a certain way. But when they come together with one kind of furious voice, they get shit done. Not always, but that's true for all powers. I mean, look at Trump, great example, most powerful man in the world, yada, yada. There's plenty of stuff that he tries to do, and he's thwarted by other powers. The courts, most notably, and sometimes the legislature, but he's not a dictator, despite what you may read on Twitter, and he's not always able to get his way with his power, and the same thing applies to the woke lobby. I don't know what you want to call it. I jokingly call it all sorts of stuff, the woke mafia and the woke-istanis and all kinds of stuff. But, whatever silly title you apply to it in order to make people chuckle. The point is that as a group, they're powerful. And not just that, speaking of lobby groups, I've called Twitter a collection of lobby groups. It's relatively small and relatively loud, representatives or self-appointed representatives of larger public communities, and they exist in close proximity to media and politics, which are also heavily online and heavily on Twitter. And therefore, their voice, rings loudly in ears of power, in ears of other power, in the power of the mainstream legacy media and of politicians who themselves have large platforms and can get stuff done. Look at someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has an enormous public profile because of her social media presence, and not just the things that she says. She and her team are exposed to a lot of stuff that happens, a lot of, woke culture related outrage through social media. And in that way, the existence of the Twitter activism class gets the message out in a very clear and a very immediate way to the media and to politics, which is exactly like a huge catalyst for cancel culture. Because I think a big aspect to cancel culture that people aren't talking about yet is reaction time. Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and whatever react instantly and in fierce, like burning fiercely at any kind of, a controversy or potential controversy, video of someone being a Karen, some tweet that is maybe worded in a poor way or misunderstood or just flat out bad, but just bad, and that's it. But the reaction is so severe and so quick that often results are required immediately just to get it to stop. And so somebody can get fired, for instance, in a situation where if it was more of like a lower simmer over a day or a week, maybe the true severity of the situation would have felt less meriting of responses like that. Instantly, everybody's fired, and instantly, our company is now going to donate tons of money to these causes, and we're going to change our entire policy. And there was a great example a while back with Starbucks, where there was a video of a couple of black guys, I think, getting thrown out of a Starbucks in a really shitty way, or, at least seemingly shitty from the video. Again, this is another aspect of it, the idea that a snippet of something tells you the whole story of it, which is really wrong, especially since, in a real world confrontation like that, you're very likely to pull your phone out halfway through. It's not like you have a chip in your brain where you blink twice, like a Black Mirror episode, you blink twice and then your eyes start recording, which, by the way, might actually help in the future, because you might have, both versions of every incident, and then, and also, like, you could see, like, the instigation of stuff like that. But it's impossible to develop any kind of perspective when there is this demand that you do something right now. And also in situations where doing something right now is just not how the system operates. For example, police shootings, a cop who shoots a suspect does not get arrested immediately. That's just, and I know that it's frustrating. I get frustrated with that sometimes too. If you see something where it's really like, just look at what happened. Just go put the guy in handcuffs, and as you would if someone was not a police officer and did that. But as much as you would like that, that's not how the system operates, since police officers are empowered by the state to use their firearms in certain situations. Again, I'm sure some of you or all of you have issues with that to certain extents, as again, I do as well. But because that situation of empowerment exists, because society says, yes, police officers are allowed to shoot people sometimes, there needs to be a process where you examine if a shooting was okay or not before you either clear someone of wrongdoing or, arrest them or suspend them or whatever. But social media wants action right now. And the lack of immediate action, even if it is mandated by existing structures, is seen as some sort of capitulation or as an acknowledgement that the people who want this are powerless. Hey, you want us to arrest this cop right now? Nope, we're going to arrest him next week after we investigate, as though it's done in an antagonistic fashion. For example, some professions, if somebody is going to get fired, like if a cop needs to get fired for something that's not shooting related, like they were late for work many times, and so their sergeant is like, I'm sorry, we're going to have to fire you or whatever. There's probably a whole, like I said, union process where you got to have a hearing and you got to have your union rep, and they're going to argue in your favor, and then maybe you don't get fired. Even if you did stuff that, if you were just working at some office, you wouldn't have the privilege of that kind of thing. And you would just been fired, for not doing your job, whatever. But again, social media is not cool with that. Social media wants right now. And when they don't get it, they get madder. And therefore, the results that are then demanded increase. And you have this atmosphere in which, and again, the letter mentions this, even things like clumsy mistakes can cost someone their job. A clumsy headline. There was a story, I can't remember which paper it was, but the headline was something like "Buildings Matter Too." It was an article about, the destruction of people's small businesses and properties is not something that's unimportant in the whole George Floyd situation. And just because of the way the headline was worded, somebody lost their job there. Now, again, I'm not saying that no headline is ever bad enough for someone to lose their job over in a substantive editorial way. If you write a headline with the N-word in it and your boss decides that you're going to have to get fired for that, I don't think anybody's going to talk about freedom of the press being harmed Although, again, I'm sure some people reading this would argue that, yes, in certain contexts, you could use it, because if you're reporting on somebody who said it, then you could use it in the headline. But, I mean, come on. The point is to be reasonable here and say, as a respectable newspaper, we're not going to run a racial slur in our headline. And if you did that, if you applied the mandate, the certain mandate we give you, that was the judgment you applied. We don't want you to work here anymore. But something that just happens to be clumsy and in retrospect, and even, I don't even think it is, but I see myself being mostly unimpressed by a lot of things that cause outrage. So I'm even willing to, for the sake of argument, step into the shoes of someone who says Black Lives Matter is a slogan that's important enough to not be reworked in cutesy ways or in other ways in order to contrast other things with what this movement does. Okay, fine. Let me try to look at things through that prism. Does that mean that anybody who doesn't have that mentality, doesn't have that same instinctive feeling about it as you, does something like that inadvertently, and then maybe if you point it out, they go shit, you know what? You're right. Let me change that. No. The transgression has occurred, and now a price must be exacted for that. And that is, again, it's not only chilling on speech, it's also a really poor way to bring people over to your side and understand your perspective. It just becomes, you drew a cartoon of Muhammad and now people are going to riot because, in their view of Islam, that is such an evil transgression, showing images of Muhammad, especially ones that they considered, disrespectful, openly disrespectful, like a cartoon mocking him. There is no, in their mind, we need to convince you that what you did was offensive to us and, hey, maybe take it down and issue an apology. No, the offense has occurred now. In the same way that, crime, you murder somebody, you steal something, even if you're sorry and you acknowledge your mistake, there is a punishment that needs to happen as a result of your action. But is that what social justice wants to be? Does social justice want to be a penal system? Or do they want to be a movement that brings people over? And I think that, in public opinion polls after the George Floyd situation showed that the movement, moved a lot of needles. It won a lot of hearts and minds, or at least made people more passionate about something that, if you generally asked them about, they probably would have agreed with anyway. Hey, do you think it's bad that, people get killed by cops like that? I'm not, yes, there are people who still defend all of this stuff for various reasons. A lot of them, bad faith reasons, but not all. But generally speaking, I don't think that the underlying issue here, the killing of George Floyd and others that are mentioned in the same sentence, Breonna Taylor, for instance, and other situations of no-knock raids, police raids that end up in the wrong houses. There are a lot of incidents like this that most people agree are bad. And I think that's I think it's a testament to most of what happened with these Black Lives Matter protests, this round of it. For instance, I thought what happened in Ferguson was less able to capture sort of, the mostly uninterested citizenry as a whole. A lot of it was because of how it was covered. I think it was a good early example of the degradation of media and social media, the sort of the intermarriage of media and social media. And I think this time around, it was done much better. Again, some people might argue that it was done much better because of the political leanings of the people who covered it, but that you could have said that about Ferguson as well, and yet the coverage of that was kind of a disaster. Again, maybe because it was more of a disaster. I don't know if I'm qualified to make any kind of substantive comparison. But let us not forget the riots and the violence, which prompts articles like, Buildings Matter Too, which is apparently such a horrible thing to say that somebody needs to lose their job over it, rather than maybe someone, writing a letter to the editor and saying, hey, like to run a letter, as publications do, run letters to the editor, saying this headline is bad. And, either change it or maybe acknowledge it, and the paper can then either do that or not. That kind of interplay, that kind of interchange has been severely eroded because of all the things I just spent, half an hour talking about, which leads us back to the Harper's letter, which was, talking about this kind of atmosphere in which the anger is so severe and so instant and so uncompromising that it will end up not creating a better society. It will end up creating a more fearful society. And an interesting thing, and like I said, the letter was rather anodyne, or it was good, but it wasn't any kind of antagonistic manifesto. And yet it dropped like a nuclear bomb on the extremely online community. I'm sure that outside of this sphere, nobody even knows what it is, or maybe very briefly in passing heard about it. But it was an earthquake. Like, I was very surprised by how angry it made people. And as I said in the beginning, it aired many different grievances. A lot of people picked out their favorite villain of the co-signers, and a lot of people, attacked the letter as a whole, and people attacked Harper's itself for being for not publishing enough non-binary writers, which is just like a highly random data point that someone seemed to have dredged up just to find some socio-political group that was severely underrepresented in Harper's over the past decade, even though, the idea that non-binary people are a group that needs to be brought into, to be included in a way that's fair. Again, I'm stepping into the shoes of somebody who feels this way. What wasn't a thing, I don't know if in 2010 anybody in any editorial board was sitting around saying, are we publishing enough non-binary people? I think that thinking is way more common now than it was 10 years ago. And so especially something as novel as the umbrella definition of people who are non-binary, focusing in on that one felt like like you're massaging the data to be like, whoa, found one group that they didn't publish a lot of. I don't know if you did a breakdown of including publications that are, woker and more socially conscious. I don't know if you won't come up with similar results for publications like that too. Again, I'm not saying this authoritatively, but attacks came swiftly, intensely, and on multiple fronts at the same time. And I think the most fascinating angle of attack that I saw was the fairly common argument, again, both on Twitter and in at least one article that I saw, was that these people were complaining about the risk of their own deplatforming or the reality of their own deplatforming, which just isn't true if you read the letter. And it's about, in fact, it comes across way more, which it does because it is, people who are at lower risk of, cancellation, although not all of them, certainly, speaking about the atmosphere in which people who aren't, immune to, or at least, have some protections against cancellation, against the consequences that people like that might suffer under this, might and do suffer under this atmosphere. And the idea that powerful people advocating for less powerful people is not good is just insane to me. And somebody said to me, if all of the signatories were marginalized people, I think that would have made the message great. And that is, once again, something that's hard for me it's hard for me to step into that mentality. I find it easy to step into a lot of mentalities that I might not agree with, but at least see some sense in, or some like worldview consistency to. And nowhere in the letter does it say this applies to us. Though people who signed the letter found themselves at risk of those kinds of repercussions, both in the past and because of having signed that letter, most notably Vox's Matt Iglesias, someone who I've clashed with and have said many critical things that range from critical to hateful. If this format persists, I might devote some of it to atoning for past tone and attitude. I got and still do get swept up in the volume and the intensity and the toxicity and the anger that Twitter can cause. And I'm going to try to break away from that. But Matt Iglesias signed this letter after having recently expressed some regret about his previous dismissal of cancel culture as an insular academia thing. And he did say at some point that he did like a mea culpa and said, it has boiled out of academia as those people graduate from college and move into the industry. A tweet that he later deleted, likely because, either he got a lot of hate, which he did, or he got some kind of behind the scenes talking to, which would have seemed less likely to me if you had told me that after he had tweeted that. But after what happened to him over the past couple of days after the publication of the letter makes me think that maybe that's a far more likely scenario. And not only did Matt face quite a lot of anger, but that was followed very closely by a coworker of his, a trans woman, tweeting out a letter that she had sent to the editors of Vox, basically saying that she felt less safe at her job because Matt Iglesias put his name on that letter alongside people who are considered severe enemies of the trans community, notably Jesse Singal and J.K. Rowling. And saying that he made her feel unsafe echoed what had happened with the Tom Cotton op-ed in the New York Times that led to the firing of an editor there, which was then vaguely mentioned in the Harper's letter, which brings this kind of full circle, if you will. Saying that she felt less safe, which was what people had said at the time, is it's engaging in legalese. It is a legal defense against you being sanctioned for doing something like that. for tweeting out a letter that you sent to your editor about how you think somebody's making you less safe at your job. But using that legal shield of, hinting at an unsafe work environment means that you have a very strong case if you suffer consequences for doing that. Now, the idea that you would feel unsafe at your job because they signed a general letter of support for a statement about cancel culture that was signed by like 150 people, and one or two others of them has written things that you personally perceive as attacks on the trans community or trans erasure or whatever, that you would feel unsafe enough to not only just tell your bosses about it, but decide to tell Twitter about it, knowing how Twitter acts with stuff like this. And the idea that an action like a story like that can be generated and kept at firestorm level by people who at the same level of passion will tell you that cancel culture doesn't exist is just like, it blows my mind. And she, very casually in passing said, "Oh, and I love Matt, and please don't do anything to him." Which, if you buy that she does not want consequences because she just said that, then, you're extremely naive. More likely, she is either washing her hands of it in order to be able to look herself in the mirror, or to be able to later say, "Hey, I didn't ask for anybody to get fired. They decided to do it. They're a business. They're allowed to do it. I said don't, but the internet got mad and they got 1 million calls and 50,000 people canceled their New York Times subscription. And so what are you going to do? Not fire the editor who ran the Tom Cotton op-ed, even though the thing that it's criticized for is not true, which you would know if you actually read it. Hey, it's not very long. It won't take up too much of your time. And you might very well walk away with it utterly disgusted, but it is not calling on the army to come and massacre protesters, which was the gist of the complaints that caused that upheaval at the Times. And so Emily VanDerWerff, I believe is her name, if she tacks on tee-hee, please don't fire him, while engaging in like a two-pronged attack, both with her bosses and the public at large, the angry activist internet public at large, belies that statement and brings me back to my very initial point, which is the knowledge deep down that marginalized community, that trans activism, that social justice activism wields power is clear here. She clearly knows in her heart that the internet has power, that marginalized people on the internet, when they speak together and loudly, have power. Otherwise, she wouldn't have appealed to him. Her bosses have power, and she knows that, and we all know that bosses wield power, especially bosses at media outlets. And so she made an appeal to power. I feel unsafe because of this person. FYI. And she made the same appeal to another power that she feels that she might have some sway with. If she felt that marginalized trans people and Twitter are powerless in society, I don't know that she would have felt the need to do what she did and how she did. Especially not claiming that she felt unsafe. I don't understand how somebody can say, I don't feel safe at work, but don't fire the person who makes me unsafe. Just know that I do, generally. I mean, fuck. We all understand what's going on here. It's like you call the secret police on your neighbor. Hey, I hear my neighbor's engaged in sedition against the state. Please don't arrest him, though. He makes a great strudel on Sundays and brings it over. I wouldn't want to miss that Sunday strudel, Mr. Stasi officer. Please don't arrest my neighbor for sedition. I just wanted you to know, in general, Have a nice day, click. And that story led to more tension at Fox. Interestingly, people openly snarked at that letter, people at Fox, and other people at Vox were very mad at them. And also, Matt Iglesias made some comment about how he made a commitment to not talk about contentious stuff on Twitter anymore. He deleted all his tweets and said that. But then Ezra Klein tweeted something that pretty much everybody took as a subtweet of Matt Iglesias and his like basically accusing him of being dishonest about his motives for signing the letter and just being a powerful person who wants to control the narrative of free speech. And Iglesias responded to him and said something along the lines of, can I respond to this substantively, or should I keep my commitment to you? Which people saw as a direct instruction, or they somehow squeezed a commitment out of him to not talk about it on Twitter. But to then, subtly and again snarkily throw him under the bus, knowing that he can't respond, was just appalling to many people. Again, to the point that he had to comment on it, and he said, "You misunderstood this." And Matt and I have been friends for 15 years, and I would absolutely never do that to them. And then they went back to the public atmosphere of schmoozing, which was again later followed up by the actual editor-in-chief of Vox saying, "Why do you think Ezra Klein calls the shots there anymore? This is actually my ship," which I would not be super proud of if I were her, both in terms of a lot of the content that Fox produces, but that's not why in this case. It's an utter shit show of a workplace right now, with an utter lack of social media discipline, collegiality. It's really, it's quite striking. I don't understand how people want to or can work in an environment like that. I thought the Times was bad, and the Times is very bad. People at the Times need to politely ask their writers to not shit on other writers in Slack, probably Barry Weiss, which I don't understand. Having worked for many different places, don't understand the idea that things like that trigger a polite request rather than a very severe, stern laying down of laws that is also then followed by people and not flagrantly flouted because all of your writers also happen to have their own so big social media brands. And that is a common thing in this industry. I see it a lot. The pursuit of your personal notoriety, your personal fame, your ability to then move beyond your current job to other jobs and bigger and better things. And it works. It works. People in this industry move up the ladder based on what they do on social media 100%. And their reach, and people get, I'm not talking about any place specifically, but places do ask about your social media reach and things like that. It is important in many places that generate revenue based on traffic. And so there is an interest, self-interest for personal brand growth. And that is once again an acknowledgement that world has power, because you would like, what need would you have to be a high profile member of that community if that didn't bring with it the potential for money, power, etc. And so I went to bat for Iglesias, not in a I like you now way necessarily, but in a way of somebody just stepping their small, their one toe off the line and immediately getting wrapped up in a controversy like this by people who say cancel culture doesn't exist. I can't repeat this enough. I cannot say enough times that all of the shitstorm around this letter, all of the attempts to out-group and intimidate and besmirch the publication, the letter itself, individual signatories of the letter, and the businesses that they are associated with was driven by people who are telling you that this stuff doesn't happen. And the word gaslighting is used a lot on Twitter, sometimes falsely. But this is what gaslighting is. This is what large-scale gaslighting is. Hey, I'm not doing to you the thing that I am currently doing to you. And the excuses are often either the person deserves it or this person is not going to actually suffer any consequences. I'm not going to succeed in getting them fired, and therefore my efforts are not worthy of mentioning. You know, it was only attempted murder. Murder doesn't exist. Therefore, murder doesn't exist. And the funny part about this is that even if you think the people who get canceled deserve it, that's not a contradiction of cancel culture. The definition of cancel culture is not people are fired and they shouldn't be fired. No. Cancel culture is the active search for and assumption of wrongdoing at everything in the attempt to hunt down people who deserve it. You know, you're not trying to catch dolphins. You're trying to catch tuna, right? And dolphins get caught up in your net. But when does the percentage of the dolphins in your tuna nets require some thought onto your methods of fishing? And so if you're catching, you know, if Juddlegum is catching bad people in, you know, in his web of cancellation, and if he says I'm holding people accountable, this is accountability journalism, he's still acknowledging that cancel culture exists. He's just downplaying the dolphins. He's saying, nah, you know, you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. Got to throw out a couple of babies with the bathwater. It's the price. It's the price of catching communist seditions, said McCarthy. You know, what are you going to do? We got to catch them commies. We got to catch the non-woke. We got to make an example of them. We got to dismantle existing structures of yada yada. But that's still cancel culture. You just think it's good. You just think cancel culture is good. You don't think it doesn't exist. You're just a fan. And with that, I think I'm going to close off this thing. Episode 1. Maybe the one and only. I hope not. I hope I can get people on here and maybe do a back and forth. Sitting here by myself talking for an hour is fun sometimes. Like it's good to both kind of, you know, work my thought process through, but also just kind of vent. But there's a lot of people out there that I would love to speak to about things, whose perspective I really appreciate, and not people who are just going to sit here and maybe nod their head and agree. You know, there's a lot of people that I've recently kind of either buried the hatchet where they've just grown close to, who have opinions that I probably find appalling. And if we really get into it and argue about it, I think Israel is a good example of a topic that people that I am now close to, who are some of them progressives, that would be an issue that we would butt heads on. And maybe it's worth it. Maybe it'll be worth it to butt heads a little, you know, in a non-aggressive way with someone over stuff like that. Maybe that's interesting. I'm sure it is interesting. Maybe it'll be interesting for you. So stay tuned. I hope you got some benefit of this, and I hope that maybe based on the responses I could grow this into something that you would enjoy, maybe something to give you interesting content. So yeah, always. You can find me on Twitter at Neontaster, and you can You can check out the other Neontaster content I do, which is here on this YouTube channel, as long as this lives on my main Neontaster YouTube channel. There's also twitch.tv/Neontaster, in which I stream video games and other things. I did live watches of the Democratic debates and such. And those Neoncasts are also available to download, like in pure podcast form at neontaster.libsyn.com. That is LIBSYN. So thank you, and I'll catch you next time, if a next time happens.